When I reviewed the first Devil May Cry, I talked about how it was a game that seemed unsure of what it wanted to be. Starting life as a Resident Evil game and turning into a character action game, it ended up stuck in the middle. The DNA of two different genres mashed together to form a game suffering inherently from an identity crisis. My hope with Devil May Cry 2 was that building on what the first game did well, and building on what made it different from Capcom's other major franchises at the time, they'd be able to carve out exactly what Devil May Cry is and make it shine. They didn't. They somehow just made everything worse. Nearly all of the Resident Evil ingredients are cast out of the sequel. The setting is expanded to a full city with multiple locations rather than a single isolated castle. Nearly all the exploration elements are gone, replaced with a more linear, straightforward level design, while the puzzles are scaled back dramatically. Puzzles now don't get any more complex than pressing some switches. Equally, the brooding, moody, foreboding tone of the original is gone too. All of this should be fine. I wanted Devil May Cry to be its own thing after all, but the big problem is none of it is replaced. Nothing is done in the sequel to replace all those elements taken out. In fact, many of the more distinctly Devil May Cry characteristics are dumbed down from the first two. Devil May Cry 2 is a hollow, thoughtless follow-on from the first. Combat is a major step down. For a game focused so heavily on action and stringing together combos, the variety of moves really limits incentive to vary up your approach. Look, I know I'm no good at games like this. My gameplay style has all the complexity of a jigsaw with two pieces, as somebody in the comments of my first Devil May Cry review was so kind to point out. But there's just so little to this game. As you level up weapons, they just get a little stronger rather than unlocking new attacks. On top of that, there is frequently absolutely no reason to use anything but your ranged weapons. They automatically lock on, it's much safer to attack from a distance, there are a ton of aerial enemies, and the damage they deal is no longer trivial. I spent the majority of the game standing back and shooting everything with my rocket launcher. There was literally no reason to do anything else. I was untouchable, and I dealt a ton of damage. Enemy AI is criminally stupid too. You just slash at everything until it dies, often without a response. In one level there were a number of big tank enemies. They looked threatening enough, but I walked right up to it and just swung at them until they died, to no response. In fact, because they had a decent amount of health, and there were 3 of them, I scrolled Twitter as I did it. The big boss fight of that level was a helicopter which I took down by standing in the exact same spot, holding fire without moving. It's also brainless. There is little in the way of enemy variety either, even bigger enemies can just be hacked at quickly. Very occasionally you'll get enemies that block or have slightly different patterns, and it's a revelation. Not to mention the automatic lock-on was more hassle than it's worth, frequently dragging you away from your intended target, especially in close quarters. The story is also pretty terrible. One of the game's big additions is 2 separate campaigns, one for Dante and one for a new character named Lucia. Thus, when you play through Dante's side of the campaign, you're missing key parts of Lucia's. As a result, stuff just happens and you have no context for it if you just play through one side of the game from start to finish. This would be less of a problem if the 2 stories were interwoven as one, but they're presented individually. I guess you can bounce between them to keep everything in line, but that's almost more trouble than it's worth. Dante is neither brooding nor cocky, he's not cool or funny. He just comes across as interminably bored by it all. You'll probably be as disinterested in the story as he seems by the end. They took the character out of character action game. Lucia's side of the story is much better. It's all very silly in the spirit of Devil May Cry, but she at least has a character arc and some honest-to-goodness character development. She also plays differently from Dante, but most of her levels are the same or very similar. The big exception being, she gets some exclusive water levels. Yay! Because there is no greater reward for playing another campaign than water levels. The other big addition is new Devil Trigger abilities. You can fly and run very fast, and when you unlock these, they introduce them using puzzles. So you think, oh, they're gonna have a bunch of puzzles based around these in the game. They don't. They're not relevant for pretty much the entire rest of the game. It's bizarre. As I make my way through the series on Switch, it's interesting to track each game's development. Devil May Cry 2 reportedly had a tumultuous development. Developed by a different team than the first, it failed to identify and build on the ideas that made Devil May Cry worth spinning off from Resident Evil in the first place. In fact, so dissatisfied with progress was Capcom that they replaced the still to this day unknown director just a few months before launch. You could see why. All the charm and style of the first was stripped back, the combat neutered, the tone obliterated, and what was left was a functional but entirely unremarkable action game. There is a little fun to be had just brainlessly running through demons, but not a lot. Devil May Cry 2 is a major disappointment. Devil May Cry 2 gets 4 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. I'm hopeful that whenever Capcom are kind enough to bring Devil May Cry 3 to Switch, that then is when Devil May Cry will shine and it will be truly the character action game everyone hopes and wants from it. Once again, apologies, I don't have much force in my voice right now because I have a cold, but I struggled through. Follow me on Twitter at GarrettKidney, GarrettKidney. On your left, a review of Final Fantasy VIII. On your right, my review of Devil May Cry 1. Thanks for watching.